Australia just became the first country to ban social media for under 16s.
I think probably the biggest question is, what is the problem we're actually trying to solve? And I'm not sure that's been clearly defined, but I think there's not been a great deal of clarity from my perspective about what it is we're actually trying to solve. My thesis was looking at the impact of initial smartphone ownership by 9 to 11-year-olds, concern from parents about things that were not happening that were before, like reading and playing with their siblings and going outside. I'm concerned about vulnerable young people, those with disability, with neurodiversity, who often can find their space, find their tribe and find a connection. But if there's one thing you can do for your child that's going to be a positive, is to keep technology out of bedrooms. Small steps, small habits make big changes. You just need to be there. If you stick your head in the sand, or if you don't, if you're not present, then you're not able to parent. You can't parent without being there, and that's challenging because people are busy. But then parenting has always been challenging.
Thank you for joining us on Dumb Ways to Get Hacked for this very special episode with regards to the social media ban and your research. But for those who don't know you, can you introduce yourself, what you do, and why it's so important that you're involved in this conversation?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bora. My name is Mark Yeowell. I run an organisation I've just established a year ago called Digital Tweens, which I've set up on the back of some research work that I've been doing for my doctorate with UNSW, looking at the initial experiences of children and young people with smartphone ownership. And my background is education, working with as a teacher and a principal. I've got 2 older teenage sons now. And I've also, prior to launching this business, worked as the CEO of a not-for-profit in Australia.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Mark, Australia just became the first country to ban social media for under 16s. Your research shows parents' biggest fears about smartphones never actually happened. So are we solving the wrong problem?
I think probably the biggest question is, what is the problem we're actually trying to solve? And I'm not sure that's been clearly defined. I think there's lots of rhetoric about what's wrong and the concerns and mental health issues and difficult algorithms and risks of content exposure and a whole raft of things. But I think there's not been a great deal of clarity from my perspective about what it is we're actually trying to solve. And whilst clearly trying to put a ban across the whole, all under 16-year-olds on all the social media platforms that have been chosen, also not completely clear why some have been selected and some haven't, I think is a fairly blunt instrument. So I'm not entirely clear what we're trying to fix, but I do believe that it's been done with good intention. And I believe that the intention is really to just give more space to children to grow up before they have to start battling with some of the challenges of social media. I think social media can be a challenging space for adults. There are some very murky corners of the social media world and some very unpleasant content that floats into our feeds through algorithms, and it very quickly responds to what you've hovered on or looked at. And I think there's some big risks there. And I think the challenges for young people in trying to make sense of those algorithms and what they're seeing, whether what they're seing is just suggesting that everyone believes the same as them or is interested in the same as them, or whether it actually is creating hiding a more complex and diverse, world that we live in, I think is important. So I think there's that. I think my question would be, is this actually going to address those problems in themselves, or are we pushing the problem into darker corners of the internet, into platforms that maybe we're not aware of? Are we making assumptions that this is going to be the fix-all? And then we're going to stop looking at other issues like education and support. I think it's possibly part of a solution, but I'm not actually sure it's the biggest part of that solution, even though we're still not completely clear what the problem is for everybody. And I think we've got to be careful that we're not assuming that one child or one young person's challenge and problem is experienced universally by every young person. I think one of the great underpinnings of my work is a belief that every child is unique and an individual, and that therefore parents are best placed to make decisions for their child's readiness for digital technologies, whether that be smartphones or for social media. And I know parents find that challenging, but I think from my perspective, my job is to upskill and to build the confidence of parents to be able to parent effectively with their children, to help them to get the best out of the online world, including up to now social media, and at the same time protecting them as much as they can from harm and helping them to navigate the complexities there. I don't know that banning is necessarily the silver bullet that some people are expecting it to be. I don't think everyone thinks that, but I do think there is a sort of a flavor of thinking, this is going to fix everything. And I think it will probably, I suspect, create some new challenges and some issues for particular sets of young people. I'm concerned about young people in rural, remote communities who rely on social media to connect with people. They may not see many young people themselves other than school, and they've got a very limited social group. I'm concerned about vulnerable young people, those with disability, with neurodiversity, the LGBTQ community, who often can find their space, find their tribe, and find a connection, and it can be very supportive for them. And I'm also disappointed for those young people who are creators and love the opportunity to push the material that they're creating out into the internet. I think we can snub that and make it sound like it's unimportant. But I was talking to a parent today whose daughter is producing some content around education and well-being and mental health. She's only 14, but she's been doing that for her age group. She's started to get traction in that space, and now she's not sure what's really happening, and she's worried that she is going to lose her platform to do that. And she's really been enjoying that, and it's been well received. So I think we can make sweeping statements that children and young people as influence and creators, it's all about makeup and hairstyles and TikTok dances. But I think there are some young people who create some very good content that's well received by their peer group and other peers that really enjoy and get value out of that. And I think I feel disappointed that the blunt approach that's been taken is effectively sweeping that out from underneath them. But I do believe, just to reiterate, that I think it is being driven by good intent, but I think it may be somewhat naive that it's going to pan out exactly as some people are expecting it to.
Yeah, that's really good. There's a few points there that I think are worth asking. What do you think the problem is?
I don't think there's a single problem. Fundamentally, I guess there is a problem. It's that tech companies are failing to moderate the content and the platform experience of all users, not just young people. And I think they've not taken, in my opinion, that responsibility seriously enough. And that's led to a sense, well, if they're not going to regulate and support and protect young people, and some parents feel that they are unable to do that, or not comfortable doing so themselves for their own children, then I think government feels that there's a need to step in. And I think that's possibly one question that's there. But I'm not sure that it's difficult to say that there's a specific problem. I think for some young people, they clearly are, accessing material. So those who have got issues and mental health issues already are getting bad advice and bad connection in some places. And we're seeing some terrible stories of young people, suicidality and eating disorders, for example, being, exacerbated by, that normalization through the algorithms that are being sought. And I think that's a massive concern, but that isn't the majority of young people. And that doesn't diminish the importance for those families who have had terrible experiences. And I'm not in any way doing that. For those, it's a terrible situation. But that's not the majority of young people. And I think this is what happens when we take those broad brushstrokes and we demonize one aspect of technology for everybody. And I think, that's just an example, but I think there are concerns over content. There, of course, are concerns over contact and predators and grooming online. But again, I don't think that's affecting the majority of young people. And I think we know that young people are going to have to encounter those challenges when they're online at some point, and that, they need support to learn the skills to deal with that. And I think young people are quite savvy. The young people I certainly have worked with when I was teaching and when I'm doing work with digital twins and when I was doing my research as well, they recognize that not everybody is who they say they are, whether they're be on a gaming platform, that not just because someone says they're at the same age as you doesn't mean they are. And I think that there's skills that have been developed there in young people that can be, need to continue to be developed. But I think that's, obviously that's a concern. For me, throughout all of this, the biggest concern for me is actually nothing to do with the platform itself. It's to do with what's pushed out by excessive use and the amount of time that young people spend online. That's not social media in itself. That could be gaming. It could be anything online, just scrolling video content. But certainly in the context of my research, one of the biggest outcomes, families went into giving their child a smartphone initially, after their tweens a smartphone, concerned about things like online predators, inappropriate content access. But the biggest problem they faced actually was the way that their smartphone ownership ate into their time, particularly through short form video viewing, particularly through text messaging, interestingly. Now, the young people I worked with initially didn't have social media when they first got their phones. Their parents kept them away from it. By the end of the year's study, 2 of the young people I worked with had some access to social media, but with a lot of guidance, a lot of support, and a lot of oversight by their parents. But they also reported challenges, self-moderating TikTok viewing of short-form video content, for example. And so I think that there's challenges, but I don't think there's a universal challenge of one problem. And I think it's, there is a risk that we say, we try to blame social media for everything. It doesn't mean it has got anything to answer for, but I think we've got to be careful just making blanket statements that it's all bad. There's certainly not, it's not all bad. I mean, adults find strong uses for social media and positive uses, and I think young people do as well. And I think we need to be careful that we don't demonize or that we take note of what we've lost in the rush to restrict and make sure that we've actually considered how we're going to help young people to replace what they're going to miss through their platform use when that's gone. And I'm not convinced that's been adequately handled at the moment. In fact, I'm not even sure most families are even believing or understanding that this ban is coming in 2 weeks' time. I think it's there's still, I'm not sure if that's being oblivious or burying the head in the sand or what, but there's certainly the families I'm talking to are not well informed at all. And these are educated people whose children are users of social media, and they're not really clear at all about what's going to happen in 2 weeks' time, how to prepare their child, and how to make sure that they find ways to support them through what they believe will be quite challenging time.
Yeah, that's, again, a lot of amazing bits of information there. I mean, I think I can add to I've had this conversation with Susan McLean and various others, that we all know there are 10, 12-year-old kids who are more mature than a 19-year-old or a 25-year-old adult, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
I agree per use case, right? And look, I'm going to give the Australian government some credit in that they've got balls to stand up to social media.
And that's good. And that is good. And as I said before, I believe that there's the intent is good. I do believe that. I'm not a conspiracist that this is, somehow a way of ushering in digital ID, or that this is somehow a sort of popularity vote. I think there is rooted in genuine concern about young people's well-being, but I'm not sure that there's been enough time spent listening to the right voices and to people who have to the experience. I think some voices have been prioritized over others, and they may not be the most informed. They may represent their own child or their own family situation or the limited anecdotes that they have themselves. But I think there are a lot of other people who had concerns that were brushed aside or not given as much weight, certainly. And the biggest voice that was missing from this discussion, in my opinion, was the voice of young people. And there was way too little, too late consultation. There's certainly, I'm sure, some in government would disagree with me on that. They say we spoke to young people about that, but I think the level of that consultation, the breadth of it, looking at young people and children from different backgrounds and with different needs and different perspectives, was somewhat limited. And I think if we can learn one thing from this, one thing I believe passionately, is that young people have got really important things to tell us about issues that affect them. And I think if we marginalize their voice and don't listen to them, we miss out on an opportunity to do something amazing. And I think it's great that the Australian government are doing something. They've raised the conversation, and there's other countries looking at this as well. It's fantastic that there's a voice and discussion around this whole issue. But I think there's been a bit of a rush, and I think unfortunately, I think that's going to be a limiter and a negative aspect of what could have been a really well thought out, considered and consulted on support plan that had more prongs than just let's ban it.
Yes, we've all heard from various sources that the key people, even being the e-safety commissioner, wasn't even involved in certain aspects of this and was basically just told, here's what we're doing, implement it, kind of a thing, which is interesting. And yes, I agree. The government should possibly have spent more money investigating and working with experts like yourself to speak to the key people in this, being the teenagers for sure. So on this podcast, usually we talk about dumb ways that adults get hacked, whether they're clicking on a dodgy link, using password 123, or like the Louvre, using the original password that was never changed and being robbed. But with kids, it's something different, isn't it? Like they're giving away locations, posting uniforms or, school photos. They're making friends with strangers online and what class they're in. You call this the digital puberty. So walk me through the most common way tweens expose themselves online without realizing it.
I think, I use the expression digital puberty, which I'll come back to refer to this period of time when a young person first gets a smartphone. And my thesis suggests that giving a child a smartphone transitions them from sort of adult-supported oversight use of digital technologies towards total independence, and that has some parallels to that process of puberty. So it's a term I've used to try and sort of create a sense of what that means. I think young people, tweens, if I pick that phase, which I define as being 9 to 12-year-olds, I think when they're online, they're in an interesting position because I think they're really clued up. I think they've heard about the importance of privacy and safety at school. Many of them, certainly parents are, again, many of them talking to their young people and children about those issues. But I think, like all children and young people, they're not always able to. The evaluation process of the situation sometimes is slower, and that cognitive thinking around what's actually going on takes time, and there's that lack of experience as well. And in the world, I think I'm not convinced that young people are gullible in the sense that they're completely naive to the fact that not everybody's who they say they are online. I think they're very aware of that. The young people I speak to, certainly in schools, fully understand that. And I think it's certainly within my research as well, those young people, they were very aware and using language like, when I asked them about the biggest risks, not getting catfished or not getting, phishing concerns as well, and being caught up in scams was another common concern that they had. But I don't know that they're beyond their maturity. They're less necessarily more vulnerable than adults. I think that because they've grown up in this space and they're very, I think, cognizant of it. I think what they lack is perhaps experience to actually, analyze situations, and possibly there's an impulsiveness about young people where they perhaps think afterwards rather than before and prioritize, get it where they are now. But I think, we've got to look at what modeling we're doing for young people as well. Parents are really not always very good at keeping their children's privacy online themselves. And I think, one of the things I talk to parents about when I speak is, making sure we set a good role model, that we need to look at the way we model good practices with technology. And I talk about that mostly in the context of digital well-being and balance in life. But I think it's applicable to things like privacy and making sure, sharing photos of your children online in their school uniform on the first day of term is for example, not a great practice probably for that privacy. I think password sharing, I think young people are sometimes will share passwords with friends and siblings and to sort of share things and not always realize the implications of that going more widely. But I'm not convinced that they're completely naive about that, just lacking in experience. And I think there are plenty of adults who get hacked or scammed or phished without realizing it, and it's exactly the same. I guess the more time you spend online and the more engagement you have, the higher your risk of falling foul of that type of practice.
Take us a little bit more inside your research.
So my thesis was looking at the impact of initial smartphone ownership by 9 to 11-year-olds. And that came about from my interest as seeing changes taking place with young people and children in schools. My background is primary education. So seeing younger and younger children starting to get smartphones, also being a parent at that time of children just at the beginning of their teen years and end of tween stage, and seeing them, the challenges that was bringing to us as parents as well. And I think I was really curious about what actually is going on. What do we know about that initial experience and what happens when a child first gets their smartphone? So I spent some time with 4 young people, 11-year-olds, who had just got their smartphone within the last few weeks, their first time. And I met with them on a number of occasions for over a year period, and then met with their parents as well, and interviewed them about their experiences, what was going on, what they were using their phone for, what they were, the challenges they were facing, the experiences they were having, what was changing in their lives, whether that be the way they related to their friends or the opportunities that were being created, and talk to their parents about the way they were managing that process to support them and how they'd come to that decision to give them a phone. And really, my study is a very in-depth study. Ultimately, it became 3 children and their experience with their phone. Very detailed. Each child has a chapter of the thesis where I've created what's called a portrait of them. It's mostly in their own words and that of their parents, telling their story of their first 12 months with a smartphone. And so then I've looked at those 3 portraits as a collection and said, well, what can we see that's in common? It doesn't mean it's common to every child, because it's not a big sample. It's not intended to be a generalizable study. It's meant to be an in-depth look at effectively a deep case study to give depth to this and understanding. And I've asked, well, what can we learn? And then from that built a model for parents and for schools for how they can support children and young people in those early stages. And as I've mentioned already, I guess that one of the biggest findings was that parents were, the biggest concern ultimately was about what was pushed out by their use of getting a smartphone. Very quickly, the amount of time they spent online escalated. They spent more and more time on their phone and on their device. That caused friction and within the family, and concern from parents about things that were not happening that were before, like reading and playing with their siblings and going outside and doing other things. On the flip side, the parents also found that they actually was helping them to be connected with their friends and to set up going out and doing things with their friends. So it built independence as well, and it certainly didn't stop them in-person activity with their friends, but it certainly began to displace some aspects of their life before. It certainly brought about change for them. And they struggled with things like self-regulation of their viewing of short-term video content. And talked about feeling addicted but not knowing how to stop. So a 5-minute viewing of videos turned into 2-3 hours of scrolling, and they didn't like that feeling. They knew it wasn't good use of their time, but it was almost impossible for them to self-regulate, and they wanted their parents' support with that. And I think that's that need and want for support with those challenges. Other challenges around huge volumes of text messages coming in, large text groups, and getting hundreds and hundreds of text messages from group chats, every evening, and then worrying about what should they do? Should they be responding to all these messages? Do they have to chip in every time? And one girl was talking to me, I just need more time on my phone to get through all these messages. This sort of sense of overwhelm was there. So these are the issues about well-being and fear, how much time is being taken up and how much of your energy and attention is being drawn by your phone. And I think that's the challenge the main challenge that was felt by these young people and their parents, trying to support them in that, but feeling that they didn't really know where to get advice. And I guess that's the genesis really of this work that I do now, was a common desire from all the parents to have more support from their children's schools at a younger age, particularly in that primary school. They felt that things might kick in later at secondary school, but they really felt that a lot of this work needed to be done earlier on to build their child's knowledge, skills and abilities with technology, beyond just safety, but about the well-being aspect. But they also wanted support and guidance collectively as a school community. And I think that's one of the reasons that I decided that this was the space that I was going to move my career into at the end of last year, when I decided to move away from my leadership role in a not-for-profit and pursue this full-time as I brought my thesis to a conclusion. So that's sort of in a nutshell what came out of it. But it's a study that will be, hopefully it's being finished and submitted for assessment soon, as in next week, hopefully. So then it'll be a public document once it's been finalized. So
I can't wait to read it, and hopefully you don't get too many marks that you have to fix. Mr. Principal, going back to school, how's that for fun?
I'm sure there'll be some things, and feedback's always good from different people. So it's
You didn't get called into the principal's office, did you?
It could well happen, yeah.
To know how it feels to be on the other side of what you put the kids through, mate. Just out of curiosity, with regards to the smartphones obviously being the key in the study here, do you think it would make a difference if the parents had got their children a traditional Nokia style or a flip phone that had the big keypad, so you other than SMSing and phone calls and very basic apps, that it would have had a different impact on the kids?
Oh, for sure. If a smartphone is like a big jump into the deep end, isn't it, of a swimming pool of technology. You basically, when you give your child a smartphone, you're giving them not a phone. It's a pocket-sized computer, a powerful computer with a huge amount of application, a huge range of potential, and a huge range of risks as well. And I think that's why I'm absolutely passionate, a bit like with the social media context, that all children are different. I just don't believe that you're saying, no one should have a smartphone until they're 14 or 16 or 12 or whatever. It doesn't matter. I just think that that's not the right, some adults aren't ready for phones when you see that, the way they use them, in my opinion. And certainly that's not me advocating for giving young children smartphones, by the way, or being cavalier about it. In fact, the first principle that in my model for parents is delay. Delay until you believe your child is ready. And I talk with families about readiness, but delay until you're ready as a parent and able to support them is key as well. And there's that, and the overriding principle as well, is there a need? So in that context, if as a parent, you believe your child doesn't need all the functionality of a smartphone and they're not ready for it and you're not ready to support them, then you should be delaying until you are, or they are, because I think we put them, young people at risk by giving them too much too soon. So I'm not certainly an advocate for early smartphone adoption, but I'm also not for saying, they shouldn't have them if there's a good rationale for doing so. And I think every child's different, every family's different, every context is different. I think that there's an opportunity to learn skills and to learn some of those skills with a non-smartphone, if you like, a flip phone or an older phone. There are also increasingly options as well that look like smartphones but have limited functionality as well. Expensive options in some cases, but there is that option as well. And so I think really planning through that journey of your child with technology, and again, making that decision, how are they dealing with things like an iPad or using your laptop? Are there tantrums whenever they're asked to put it down? If they're falling out with their friends in face-to-face situation all of the time, the chances are that will be exacerbated by them having a phone and being involved in text groups and chats and things. So it's about helping parents to feel confident, informed and skilled to be able to make good decisions for their children, and to believe that it's their space to. And my model's called Driver, and that's the acronym, because parents need to drive this process. It shouldn't be being driven by peer pressure to get a phone. It shouldn't be being driven by, I want one, I need one, everyone's got one. It shouldn't be being driven by a sense that if they're a fear that their child will be left out. It should be being driven by readiness, necessity, and access and ability to support. And so, yeah, I think that non-smartphone options can be a great option for some children and young people. And certainly if I talk to parents, I talk often, I say, if you're going to say no, don't just say no, say not yet, because it leaves the door open for a decision. And if you're able to go further and say not yet, but when I see that you can, or when we've got this experience, or when you, or whatever, then I think that sets up that this is part of a journey. It's an important step. It's not to be taken lightly. After all, if my thesis is correct that this triggers digital puberty, we don't trigger puberty in our children until we trust their bodies are ready for that, and then we walk alongside them in that process. And we certainly don't try and induce early puberty, and nor do we try and delay normally either. And so we need to be with our young people and children in this phase, and realizing that it brings around a change, and we need to make sure that we are being responsible as adults in the timing of that, because we do have some say, and then how we support them afterwards.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting point before when you mentioned about when you talk about parents, and a lot of parents don't realize we're literally 2 weeks away from, or so away from this. What I see a lot of, and again, you're a principal that's dealt with this firsthand for many years. Are parents going to go back to that model where, well, okay, I don't understand, this is the school's problem? Do you think that's going to be a problem for schools where the parents are going to be coming back to the teachers, the coordinators, the principals saying, you need to help us out, when it's not something that's got anything to do with the school? And I know what you're doing helps to work together with the schools, the educators, as well as getting parents in. Do you think that's going to cause issues for schools now with the changes coming in 2 weeks?
I think it potentially will. I mean, it's ironically timetabled just at the start of the school holidays, which could be a blessing for schools, but a nightmare for parents. But I think schools already should and have an important opportunity to work with parents on digital wellbeing, digital safety, and digital literacy anyway. And I think it should already be a partnership. I'm not sure that partnership is necessarily those cogs are linking in well enough at the moment, but I know from experience of my research and from talking to families that they do want support. They value that sense of being part of a community and being able to access views of other people. And I think Schools for many families are one of the few places that they belong as a collective to something, during that time. There's a very strong sense of their peer group is all in that same space often. Yes, there's sports clubs and churches sometimes and other groups, but schools have a real good opportunity there to bring people together to share and to stimulate discussion and conversation, which can help. I was working with a school earlier this year who had decided as a school that they were going to make a recommendation about smartphones and have not a policy, because it's not their place to have that, but to suggest to parents that these are ways that you could, if we all took this decision to hold back on the smartphones a little bit longer, and we all, really showed value for, the balance and with technology in life and the importance of in-person communication, then there's a sense that we're in this together and that this is part of our culture and our community. And I think that schools have an opportunity to do that. They don't have to, nor do they have the mandate to necessarily to lay down the law, but that's not what it's about. I think they can listen to parents, they can create conversations, they can access expertise and share a guidance and support, but recognizing all the time that every child and every family is different. And that's why we don't need blunt instruments to solve issues. We need a nuanced and empowered parents. This is, in my opinion, the challenge we've really got is much bigger than technology. It's about parents feeling confident about parenting their children. That's not saying, that's different from saying need to be competent. I'm not questioning competency, but I think parents feel, it's a really demanding job to be a parent, and not just with digital technology. And I think, families are very isolated in many cases. There's not these sort of social support networks that perhaps there were historically for families. And so parents need to feel confident that how to, be a parent and to how to really give their best support to a child. And I think that lack of confidence can often result in inactivity. And that's true in the digital world as well. So schools can step in and support that, create community, create cohesion in parenting together. That, I guess, it's slightly glib, but that sort of takes a village to raise a child. I think it's that back to that sort of mentality that if we can work together, and I guess, attempts at collective decision making by government, like the social media ban and other things, do add to that sense that we're all in this together. It's not just one child or one family having to step out of the ring. And that's probably a positive for parents that want to do that, and want to hold social media, for example, from their children. But there's no doubt that being, part of a group and a sense of community and together we agree on this and we're looking out for each other's kids and the best interests of young people is a really positive thing. It's a cohesion matter for society. And I think schools have an opportunity there.